Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for joining our weekly Al-Bayan lectures class. Sheraz Bhai is with us. Please, Sheraz Bhai, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Let me share my screen. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
I can see my screen.
So I hope everybody can see the slides. Can you?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. So let's start. Today we're going to cover two different topics under the introduction of Quran, major topic. One is what is the topic of Quran in general, and the other one is the arrangement that exists in Quran today, whether it's the arrangement of verses inside a surah or the arrangement of surahs inside a Quran, right? What is it all about, and what is the wisdom behind this arrangement? So these two things are very important, and this is the second last lecture under the umbrella of Introduction to Quran. And the lecture next week, inshallah, will be the last lecture, and after that we can start studying the Quran, hopefully. So as far as the topic of Quran is concerned, we need to understand a couple of things. Number one, we can divide the human race into two different eras for the sake of this discussion. One era, we can call it the prophetic era. The prophetic era is the era from Prophet Adam to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It's the era in which God kept sending his prophets and messengers to guide the mankind. The second era is post-Prophet Muhammad era. So it's the post-prophetic era because Prophet Muhammad is the last and final messenger. So the mankind can be divided into these two distinct eras. But what is the distinction? Okay, in one era, prophets were sent by God. In another era, they weren't. But how come it's related to our discussion? This a very important concept that's explained in Quran. It's called Sunnatullah, the way the God operates. These are the recurring established practices that God has set up for himself. These are the standards that God has set up for himself. Nobody else can set any standard for God, right? But these are the practices that God follows repeatedly again and again by his own will. And the Quran says explicitly that you won't find any change, any alteration, any deviation in the ways of God, in the Sunnatullah. So there are different things that are part of Sunnatullah, but the one that is related to us is, it's mentioned in chapter 17, verse 77. That is our established way for those we have sent before you of our messengers, Rasul, and you will not find in our ways any alteration. What is this verse even talking about? The miniature day of judgment. That once a messenger conveys the message to his direct addresses, then if they reject the message, the wrath of God befalls upon them on this very same planet. God don't wait till for the day of judgment to decide their case. So this miniature day of judgment that comes in this very world, in the language of Quran, it's called Sunnatullah, established way of God. So if you recall, so far we have studied that religion has two parts: wisdom, which we call hikmah, and kitab, which is also called sharia, the law. The wisdom part comprises of articles of faith and morality, and the sharia comprises of all the laws that we need to abide by, whether it's related to punishments or it's related to rituals or whatnot. But this Sunnatullah is neither article of faith nor Sharia. It's something that is related to God, not something related to us. This is the most important thing that we need to understand. That when Quran says that something is sunnatullah, it's how God operates, or how God does things, or how God intervenes in this world. It has nothing to do with the Sharia, the law, the kitab that is related to me, Shiraz, or you who are the readers of Quran or addresses of Quran. Let's move on. If we look at chapter 10, verse 47, we have already read this verse a couple of times in our previous sessions, that for every nation there is a messenger. If you recall, this is the verse that is related to the post-Abrahamic era, because after Abraham, there was a Ummat Wusta. But be as it may, so when their messenger comes, it will be judged between them in justice, and they will not be wronged. So the Sunnatullah is that God, once he sent his messenger to a nation, they will be judged, they won't be wronged, and if the justice is to punish them, they will be punished in this very world. And that punishment is part of Sunnatullah, not Sharia. Now, weren't we discussing the topic of Quran? Yes, we are. Now let's define the topic of Quran. What is the subject of Quran? The Quran is nothing but a narrative of a messenger's warning. Who's that messenger? Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. As mentioned in chapter 6, verse 19, and this Quran was revealed to me that I may warn you thereby, and whomsoever it reaches. Quran told Prophet Muhammad to say this to the rest of the world in the words of God. Here, me is referring to Prophet Muhammad. And this Quran was revealed to me that I may warn you thereby, through this Quran, and whomsoever it reaches, even after the demise of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So the Quran itself is what? It's a narrative of warning of a messenger. It's a biography of Prophet, not autobiography, a biography of Prophet that doesn't talk about the personal life of Prophet at all. It's a narrative of a messenger's warning, Inzar. And why we needed to discuss history, Sunnatullah, and messengerhood before that, that we need to keep this in mind, that when we are reading Quran, whatever we are reading, whether it's related to the religion, the guidance that is for us, whether it's related to wisdom, whether it's related to Sharia, or it's related to Sunnatullah. So whatever is related to Sunnatullah is how God operates. We will study it, we will pay heed to it, pay close attention to it, we will learn from it, but it's how God operates. It's not something that you and I are eligible to do. This is very important when we study Quran. Because Quran is a narrative of a prophet? No, it's a narrative of a messenger. So with messengerhood comes the law of establishing justice on this very world and not waiting for the day of judgment. So what is the topic of Quran for the last time? It's a narrative of a messenger's inzar, warning. There are 4 different phases generally that happens during this warning or preaching of a messenger. I will skim through them very quickly. One is inzar. Inzar means giving warning to the people about the hereafter. One is inzar-e-am, means doing it at a more pronounced way to the masses, right, at a bigger or larger scale. The third thing is very important, and this is where the difference between a prophet and messenger comes into play. This phase is called itmam-e hujjat, itmam-e hujjah. What it means, communicating the truth to the extent that no one among the addressees is left with an excuse to deny it. Every messenger, Rasul, that was sent by God on this planet always did it Itmam Hujjah. They can't be killed, they won't die before Itmam Hujjah. After that, they are human beings, anything can happen to them. But God will ensure that through this, God already ensured that through these messengers, the truth was communicated to their audience to an extent that they have absolutely no excuse to deny it. And once that happens, the last phase of Hijra Wabra, what does that mean? That the wrath of God is going to befall upon the nation. If we look at chapter 4, verse 165, what does it say? It talks about Itmam Hujjah, that we sent messengers, Rasul, as bringers of good tidings and warners, so that mankind will have no argument against Allah after the messengers. So it's absolutely essential for the messengers to convey the message to an extent so that, what the verse is saying, that mankind will have no argument against Allah. They can't make any excuses. Now, once that happens, though it's very logical to drive that the people who rejected the messengers rejected them deliberately, because if the truth was clear to them to the extent where they had no logical reason to deny the messengers, then the only probable or possible option is that they did it deliberately. But Quran actually mentioned it in words. Chapter 2, verse 89. But then when there came to them that which they recognized, they disbelieved in it. When there came to them that which they recognized. So once they recognized the prophet, once they recognized the message of the book of prophet, then they disbelieved in it. So the deliberation was, the denial was deliberate. So what happens after Itmam Hujjah? When we read Quran, there are different use cases or scenarios. I try to sum it up in one slide. Supposedly, at the end of Itmam Hujjah, once it's done, once the truth has been communicated to the direct addresses to an extent where they have no reason, no legitimate reason to deny it, there are generally two scenarios. The messenger and his companions are few in number. The messenger and his companions are few in number, and they have no political authority in land. The messenger and his companions are ample in number, and they have some land where they have some political authority as well. These are the two different types of scenarios that generally come across in Quran. So if it's the first case, that if messenger and his companions are very few in number, then generally what happens? They migrate from the land, and then God uses the so-called natural means to destroy the nation. Whether it's flood, or it's wind, or it's something else, natural calamities befall upon that nation. These are the means through which God destroys the nation. If messenger and his companions are very few in number and they can't do anything, then God asks them to migrate from the land, and the nation is destroyed by God directly through natural means, natural calamities. In second scenario, what happens is that messenger and his companions are asked to migrate. God provides them a piece of land where they gain some political authority, and because they are ample in number, the wrath of the God befalls upon the direct addresses of the messenger, through messenger and his companions, through their swords. This is exactly the case that happened when Prophet Muhammad migrated from Makkah to Medina and when he gained political authority. Now, is it always the case that the audience of the messengers are always annihilated, completely destroyed? No. If the addressees of the messenger are polytheists, then yes, they're always completely destroyed. Not a single one of them survives. But if we read Quran closely, we come to know that if the addresses of the messenger are monotheists, then they are not annihilated. They are not completely destroyed. In fact, their punishment is subjugation. For example, what happened to the people of the book, Jews and Christians, who were the direct addresses of Prophet? They were subjugated. That was the punishment of humiliation for them. Same was the case for Prophet Jesus as well. His audience were Jews. So they were monotheists, but they denied a messenger. So they were not annihilated, completely destroyed, but their punishment is clearly mentioned in chapter 3, verse 55. And their punishment will stand till the day of judgment, as mentioned in chapter 3, verse 55. So the second last messenger and the last messenger are the examples that we can take from Quran. Then when their audience are monotheists, but they are rebellious to messenger, and in other words, rebellious to God, still they get subjugated. Their punishment is subjugation, not destruction. But if the audience are polytheist, then they get completely destroyed. So there are two things that we need to infer or derive from this information. That in Quran, we're going to see two types of laws. One that is related to us, me, you, common man. We call it Sharia. By definition, it means the law that is defined in the religion for us. The second one is Sunnatullah. It's related to God and messengers. It has nothing to do with you and me. If this is established, then it has certain natural corollaries, consequences. I try to explain it in two premises. In premise one, if the direct audience of the messenger, in case of rejecting the messenger, should be destroyed, we have already established that. If they should be destroyed, if that is the law, then what shall happen to people who accept Islam, who were the direct audience of Prophet, and 2 weeks later, 2 months later, reject Islam and go back to their original religion, which we normally call apostasy, irtidad? They should be killed. They can't dodge the punishment for a couple of weeks and then revert back to their old practices of polytheism and whatnot, and they're going to get scot-free? No. So polytheism will be punished by death, was punished by death if somebody was a direct addressee of the messenger. Apostasy was punished by death if somebody was a direct addressee of the messenger. Disbelief, kufr, was punished by death if somebody was a direct addressee of a messenger. But is it related to Sharia or Sunnatullah? It's related to Sunnatullah. So Quran is going to explain the wisdom to me, wisdom of the religion to me. It's going to explain the Sharia to me. And inshallah, if we act upon it, if we abide by it and die by it, inshallah, by the grace of God, we're going to go to paradise. But because Quran is a narrative of a messenger, not merely a prophet, but a messenger, it's also going to explain what happened at the time of messenger. and it's going to explain the laws and even command the messenger and his companions to execute the laws of Sunnatullah. But they are not related to us. So we have to differentiate between these two different types of laws. Number two, because messengers and prophets were sent by God to guide humanity, it was a common practice that God showed signs, ayat. I'm not talking about the verses. In simple terms, miracles. Jesus raised people from the dead, cured the blind. Moses parted the sea, etc., etc. Are those miracles part of the religion, Sharia? They can't be part of wisdom. Are they part of Sharia, or they're part of Sunnatullah? Or they are a consequence of Sunnatullah? They are under Sunnatullah. They are not part of Sharia. So if messengerhood, prophethood has ended, Prophet Muhammad is the seal of prophets, why would there be any more miracles? Well, God can do whatever he wants, but I'm talking about somebody as a representative of God showing miracles on the face of the earth. Not going to happen. Number two, you will find angels interacting with people who are not even prophets. Very quickly, two examples. Two mothers. Mother of Jesus, Mary, angel interacted with her on multiple occasions, explicitly mentioned in Quran. Mother of Moses, angels interacted with her, and you know the rest of the story. She put her son in a cart or whatnot, and then put that in a river or canal that led to the palace of Pharaoh. So neither the mother of Jesus nor the mother of Moses were prophets, but angels interacted with them. It was a noticeable interaction. Who knows? Angel and might still be interacting with you and me. By the will of God, they put something good in our heart and we do some good deed. We are not talking about such interactions. We are talking about noticeable interactions that are visible and prominent to everybody. That's also part of the Sunnatullah. Falls under the category of rules and ways of doing things when God sent his prophet and messengers on his planet. And because the prophethood has ended, there won't be any such things anymore. There won't be any miracles. There won't be any noticeable interaction of angels. These are the two premises that we can drive once we differentiate between Sharia and Sunnatullah. Arrangement of Quran. Can I go 5 minutes overboard today just to cover this topic? Or would that be too much? By the way,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah, I think that should be fine.
All right.
I'm just going to check the audience, and yeah, so they're saying yes, you can.
Okay, great, thank you. So, what about the arrangement of the Quran? The Quran contains surahs, right? Here on the slide, when you see the word chapters, it doesn't mean surahs. I will use the term surah for surahs, right? Just so that there is no ambiguity or no confusion around it. Quran contains surahs. Who arranged verses in these surahs? God did. So this arrangement is divine. Who arranged the surahs, their order in Quran? God did. It's divine. Yeah, the rukus, the paras, dividing the Quran into 30 almost equal portions, right? It has nothing to do with God. It's something that we humans did. So what is divine so far? Surahs. an arrangement of verses in these surahs. It's from God. God communicated it to Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad communicated it to the rest of the world. But there is something very interesting that Quran tells us about its own arrangement. It's mentioned in chapter 15, verse 87. We have bestowed upon you, who's you? Prophet Muhammad, of course. Saba min al-masani. 7 masani, which is the great Quran, or Quran in Azim. That's the Arabic. So the Quran contains 7 what? Just put a question mark there in your head. Quran contains 7 masani. So it's okay to call it groups. It's okay to call it chapters. In one of the books of Javed Ahmed Ghamidi, he called it groups. Shehzad Salim called it chapters. You can call it whatever you like. So I'm going with the term that Shehzad Bhai used. So Quran contains 7 masani. What is masani? Masani is plural of masna, which means something that exists in pairs. So Quran contains 7 groups or chapters in which the surah exists in pairs. Does every surah in Quran has a pair? No. Most of the surahs have a pair? Yes. Some of the surahs act as a preface of a group, or even for the entire Quran. For example, Surah Fatiha, right? You can consider it a preface for the entire Quran. Some surahs act as, the conclusion of a group. For example, Surah Nur, chapter 24, Surah Zab, chapter 33. We will discuss it in a bit more detail. So, how many surahs are there in Quran? 114. Out of which, how many are Makki and Madani? Now, these are the terms that are used to describe the content of a surah, or not the content, I'm sorry, but the revelation period of a surah. But when you call a surah Madani, it does not necessarily mean that all the verses of that surah were revealed after Prophet Muhammad migrated to Medina. And when you call a surah Makki, that does not necessarily mean that all the verses, every single verse and every single word of that surah, right, was revealed in Makkah. But first of all, and most importantly, who decides if a surah is Makki or Madani? Is it divine, just like the arrangement of the verses in a surah or the arrangement of surahs in Quran? No. The answer is no. The scholars decide. Let's be very clear about it. Surah XYZ is Makki or Madani is something that is opinionated by scholars. It's an opinion of a scholar. It's not divine revelation. This information is not divine. It didn't come to us through God. Number one. According to Al-Mawrid school of thought, right, how many surahs are Makki? Out of 114 surahs of Quran, 91. How many of them are Madani? 23. To be precise, almost 79.8% of the Quran, almost virtually 80% of the Quran is Makki. Only 20% of the surahs are Madani. Right? If you just, when I say the Quran, most probably it's not the right word, because you might think that if Quran has 100 verses, 80 verses are Makki. I'm only talking about the surah count, to put it that way. But one thing is absolutely correct, that 2/3 of the Quran talks to the polytheist of Arabia. That is something you may find interesting. So what is the implication of this information? The implication of this information is that this pairing is not random. In each group, there are 7 groups in Quran, call them 7 chapters or whatever term you would like to use. And in each group or chapter, there exist surahs in pair. But what is the wisdom behind surahs existing in pairs. They complement each other. So generally, every group has a theme. I will describe the theme of each and every group in the next slide. Every group has a theme, a major theme. And each surah has its own theme, which is directly related to the major theme of the group, the main theme of the group. And when there are surahs that exist in pair inside Quran, these pairs complement each other in one way or the other. Let me give you a very quick example. Surah Baqarah, chapter 2. Mostly, the Quran is conveying the message to the Jews and asking them to revert to the religion of Abraham. If you're going to read chapter 3, Surah Al-Imran, which is a pair of chapter 2, Surah Baqarah, the message of Islam is conveyed to the Christians. So chapter 2 is focusing on Jews, even though it's talking to people of the book. And in chapter 3, even though it addressed Jews, but mainly chapter 2 is talking to Jews, chapter 3 is talking to Christians. So combined together, these two surahs are conveying the message of Islam to the people of the book. Let's move on. Let's quickly note down these 4 points. Skim through them. Each chapter of the Quran begins with, but group. Each chapter or group of the Quran begins with one or more Makkan surah and ends with one or more Madinan surah, Madni surah. Another important thing, you may find this point very interesting. The arrangements of surah in Quran, they are not in chronological order, but the arrangement of surahs in a group are in chronological order. What does that mean? Surah Baqarah was not the second surah that was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But Surah Baqarah came before Surah Al-Imran, which is chapter 3, which came before Surah Nisa, which is chapter 4, which came before Surah Maida, which is chapter 5. So inside a group, the arrangement of surahs are chronological. That is something, again, I find it very interesting. But the overall arrangement of surahs in Quran are not chronological. Now, each chapter or group discusses some aspect of the overall theme of the Quran. What is the overall theme? It's a narrative of a messenger. Remember, Inzar, Inzar-e-Am, Itmam-e-Hujjah, Hijrat al-Bara. So one of these phases are discussed in every group because the messenger is going through one of these phases. So, and the surah discuss many things that are local, many things that are global, and it also relates itself to the phase which is the main theme of the group. These 4 phases, Inzar, Inzar-e-Am, Itmam-e-Hujjah, Hijrat al-Bara. Each chapter has its own theme around which the surah revolves. And this theme is on top of the 4 phases of messengerhood that we already discussed. Is everybody with me so far? Shall I stop? Is it too much for today? Or shall I continue and just describe the theme of each one of these chapters or groups? It's up to the audience.
As you please.
I'm pleased either way, but as long as you guys can absorb it, that's what matters more. The intention is not to cover too much material, but to convey the message properly so that everybody is on the same page. Shall I continue? Okay. So let's discuss the theme of each one of the chapters. First of all, very quickly. Chapter 1 starts from Surah 1, ends at Surah 5. Surah 1 is Makki, 2 to 5 is Madni. Chapter 2 starts from Surah 6, ends at Surah 9, right? Chapter 3 starts from 10, ends at Surah 24. Chapter 4 starts from Surah 25, ends at 33. Chapter 5 starts from Surah 34, ends at 49. Chapter 6 starts from Surah 50, ends at 66. Chapter 7 starts from Surah 67, ends at Surah 114. So, in chapter 1, only the first Surah, Surah Fatiha, normally we call it Alhamdu Sharif, right, in Indo-Pak. It's the Makkan Surah. The remaining 4 surahs, Baqarah, Al Imran, Nisa, Maida, all of them are Medinan surahs. They were revealed in Medina, post-migration. What is the theme of this group, this chapter? To communicate the truth to Jews and Christians in a conclusive manner. Focus on these words, conclusive manner. We read these words a few slides ago under the label of Itmam-e-Hujjah. When the truth is communicated in such a conclusive manner that the addressees have no legitimate excuse to reject it, that's what Itmam-e-Hujjah is. So when the first line is saying to communicate the truth to Jews and Christians in a conclusive manner, means that doing Itmam-e-Hujjah on Jews and Christians. That's point number 1 of this chapter, of the theme of this chapter. You must be wondering why the first chapter of the Quran is talking to the people of the book. The Prophet was born in Makkah. He grew up in Makkah. He by the age of 40, he got his first revelation. Even after that, he stayed in Makkah for 13 years. So shouldn't the Quran start with conversation with the polytheists? We will discuss this shortly. And I will try to cover it in question and answer sessions as well. So in the first group, who are the main addressees? People of the book. Point number 2. We already discussed Prophet Abraham in great detail. And after Prophet Abraham, his progeny, his descendants were chosen as Ummat-e-Wasta. And they were responsible for conveying the message of God to the rest of the humanity. And prophets were only sent in his progeny, among his descendants. We already discussed that. So Bani Israel was given the first chance. The descendants of Jacob were given the first chance. And for after 2,000 years, what happened? That they failed God over and over again. And finally, this title of Ummat-e-Wasta was given to whom? Bani Ismail. So this is what the point 2 is talking about. Institute a new Ummah and a description of its final covenant. So, Jews and Christians, Bani Israel, they were deprived of this title. I won't say deprived, they were discharged, right? And now this title has been given to Bani Ismail. And now because this title is given to the Bani Ismail, it's a responsibility. God is setting up a new covenant with them. By the way, what is this covenant? Quran, the book that you hold in your hand. Read it. It contains all the clauses of the covenant. Number 3, spiritual purification, tazkiyah, which is the purpose of religion, and segregation of believers from disbelievers. Really? Does Islam tell us to separate ourselves from people of other religion or somebody who disagree with us? Unless or until the Muslims are segregated. At the time of Prophet, Messenger, the Muslims get segregated from the disbelievers. How the wrath of God is going to befall upon them? Right? Whether it's going to be through natural calamity or through war. You have to separate yourselves from them. Otherwise, you can't execute the punishment. So this is the theme of chapter 1. Communicating the truth to Jews and Christians, doing it on them, instituting a new ummah, that's Bani Ismail, declaring them as Ummat-e-Wasta, spiritual purification of the believers and their segregation from the disbelievers. What is the theme of chapter 2? Communicating the truth to the polytheists in a conclusive manner. It does not mean that truth was not communicated to them before, but Itmam-e-Hujjah was done on them in the 2nd chapter, and the punishment, Hijra Bara, both for the polytheists as well as for the people of the book. So chapter 2 is the climax, in which it ends at Surah Tawbah, which defines all the punishment for everybody. So here, where the miniature day of judgment, right, happens at the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Point number 2, spiritual purification and segregation of believers from disbelievers. This is something that you will see repeatedly. Spiritual purification, spiritual purification, spiritual purification, spiritual purification throughout Quran. Irrespective of the fact that which phase of the messengerhood you are going through. That's why you can say it unequivocally that the purpose of religion is purification, tazkiyah, and segregation of believers from disbelievers. Now, if the punishment has been executed over here, you will see things started from that point onward. Things will start moving backwards. If you see the theme of chapter 3, it is to warn the Quraysh. Notice, polytheists, Quraysh are also polytheists. The truth is communicated to them in a conclusive manner in chapter 2. Now, before communicating the truth to them in conclusive manner, yes, Inzar and Inzar-e-Am phases were going on. This is what you see in chapter 3. It's going backwards. It's reverse chronological order of sequence. To warn the Quraysh, very interesting point. It will be repeated 3 times in chapter 3, in chapter 5, and in chapter 7, to give glad tidings to the Prophet and believers of domination in Arabia. Quran says this over and over again to Prophet Muhammad, even at the very beginning of his journey, that you and your followers are going to dominate your opponents and you will rule Arabia. Just focus on this. Just keep that in mind. Chapter 3, the same point will repeat in chapter 5 as well as in chapter 7. So, okay. What is the theme of chapter 4? I'm not going to repeat the same things again. What is unique about it? Validation of prophethood of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So these chapters are specifically focusing on the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad. Speciality of chapter 5, especially focusing on Tawheed, monotheism, along with everything else that you can see. Again, you will see glad tidings to Prophet and believers about domination in Arabia. Speciality of chapter 6, validation of day of judgment. Chapter 7, talking to the leadership of Quraysh, not to the masses. Yes, you're right. It's not a typo. So if we look at this in the form of 2 slides, thing doesn't make much sense, right? So let's sum it up like this. If you want to look at things in more or less chronological order, start from chapter 7, go to chapter 6, 5, 4, 3. What's happening? In chapter 7, the message is conveyed to the leadership of Quraysh. After that, to the entire Quraysh. After that, to the entire Arabia, the polytheist of Arabia. That's how the journey of conveying the message of Islam to the polytheist of Arabia took place, like this. So Inzar, Inzar-e-Am, Itmam-e-Hujjah in chapter 2, to the polytheist. If you're going to look at the people of the book, Jews and Christians, they were conveyed the message of Islam in group 1 in a conclusive manner. Tamam hujjah was done on them in a conclusive manner, an execution of punishment in chapter 2. So for the polytheist, the execution of punishment happened in chapter 2. For the people of the book, the execution of punishment happened in chapter 2. So this is if you're going to look at Quran from the perspective of polytheists, and if you're going to look Quran from the perspective of people of the book. One very simple reason is that the direct addressees of Prophet Muhammad, who were polytheists, they are part of history now. They are no more. Because every direct addressee of a messenger who is a polytheist gets destroyed. But Jews and Christians, because they were primarily monotheists, even though they had many polytheistic beliefs like Muslim of today do as well. But primarily, who are we? Monotheists. Who are people of the book? They're monotheists, right? So our relationship with them is going to continue till the day of judgment. So they are not part of history. They are living, breathing reality that existed at the time of Prophet. They still exist, and they're going to exist till the day of judgment. So Quran starts talking to them. If you want to read about history at the time of Prophet Muhammad, about the people who lived back then, but they didn't survive, those chapters are later on. So if you're going to look Quran from the perspective of believers, notice spiritual purification and segregation from disbelievers, from chapter 1 all the way to chapter 6. The topic of segregation from disbeliever didn't happen in the beginning, because chapter 7, from a chronological order, these are the first few surahs that were revealed. This is where the journey of messengerhood of Muhammad began 14 centuries ago. But throughout this period, when Prophet and his followers, they were subjugated, they were persecuted, they had to leave Makkah many times over. Sometimes they migrated to some other place. Sometimes they migrated to some other place. And finally, they migrated to Medina. Throughout this course, Quran was giving them glad tidings of the dominance of truth in Arabia, that they're going to succeed. They will rule the land. The truth of Islam will prevail. It's mentioned in chapter 7, earliest phase of preaching. Chapter 5, chapter 3. If you're gonna, as a believer, look at these verses. So in chapter 1, people of the book, they are discharged from any responsibilities. And now we are the new ummah. So if we are the new ummah, then we're gonna have new covenant. We will have new laws. We will have a Sharia. Mostly it's Millat Ibrahimi with some minor changes. And you will find verses related to inheritance and worship and this and that, mostly in chapter 4, chapter 5. So this is the part that is mostly related to you and me today. So if we're going to open up Quran and read what we are supposed to do today, you will find these chapters mostly related to us. It's not, I'm not saying these chapters are not related to us. Every single word of Quran is related to us. But if Quran is going to talk about Lat, Manat, and Uzza, if Quran is going to talk about the Quraysh and their behavior, yes, we're going to learn from them, but there is nothing for us to do there. If you want to learn what you have to do, then this is exactly from where the Quran is beginning. And over here, the victory over disbelievers that was promised throughout the phase of preaching. So this is kind of a pyramid. Chapter 2 or group number 2 is at top. From one side, the journey of conveying the message to the people of the book. from inzar, inzar-e-am, itmam-e-hujja, all the way to punishment. From the other side, the journey of conveying the message to polytheists, inzar, inzar-e-am, itmam-e-hujja, and punishment. So chapter 2 is the culmination, the final point. This is how the chapters are arranged in Quran. That's it. I'm going to stop here. And sorry for taking 12 more minutes today. And I'm open for any questions.
No, thank you very much, Sheraz, for that lecture. So we have 3 minutes. If anyone has any questions, I think there is one question on the chat.
Yeah, it did happen. But because in group 1, Inzar happened, Inzar-e-am happened, as well as Itmam-e-hujja happened. So what is the most important thing to mention in the slides? That it reached the final stage in group 1. The people of the book, it's not that they were first addressed in Surah Baqarah. No. All the chapters that are primarily talking to polytheists, many times people of the books are addressed in those chapters as well. But they are not the primary addresses. So all these phases happen, they always happen. But if in a group, Itmam-e-hujjat has happened, if the truth has been communicated to an extent where nobody can deny it, then it naturally means that I don't need to mention the previous phases in those slides. It's understood. I'm just answering the written question upon them. Sorry.
Okay, perfect. Does anyone else have any questions? Otherwise, we'll just wrap up for today. Don't think we have any more questions. Thank you so much, Sheraz, for today's lecture. And this recording will be available on cloud, so we'll, I guess, share more information through our WhatsApp group. If there are no more questions, then we can call it a day, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
All right, Jazakallah.
Okay.
Jazakallah. Allah Hafiz.